Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Millian, and this is a podcast where we discuss feminist issues in music and pop culture, all while empowering fangirls.
Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
Before we get into things today, we have some cute, silly things to talk about. As you guys know, we've been doing our weekly artist interviews. We're having a lot of fun with it. We hope you guys are having a lot of fun with it because I think it's so cool getting to talk to so many different artists. But This past week, I kind of got to talk to a personal homie, which was awesome. We talked to the band Vacations, but specifically my friend Campbell Burns, who's the frontman of Vacations. They're an Australian band. They've been spending a lot of time in America this past year, and he's just a cool guy. And so when they had the album coming out, I was really excited to have him on our interview series to get to talk about the album and his life and coming from Australia and a lot of really cool things.
It's really exciting to get to talk to people that we already kind of know to some extent, because I got to hang out with Campbell a couple of days prior to the interview in New York City. So we went into it where it's Jenna's his friend, I'm his new friend, and it was really fun because
just a homie hang.
Yeah, but I feel also if you listen to the interview series in general, I feel you guys can tell that we pride ourselves on making these artists feel comfortable in the conversations. And so to feel we had basically the same caliber of conversation with Campbell that we have with strangers just felt very rewarding at the end, where I was wow, Jenna and I are doing such a good job.
It is funny. And if you hear us teasing each other, it's because we're buds.
That's why.
It's because we're homies. But no, it was a fun interview. And I think, this Vacations out, honestly, you guys are maybe even fans of Vacations yourself, but it was very cool getting to deep dive on this album. And I really enjoyed listening to this album. So being able to sit down with Campbell and talk about everything that they've been through in the last decade as a band, but also even just the last year of touring extensively in America and in Europe after coming from Australia is just very cool to hear his perspective on life.
I think even if you guys aren't fans of Vacations and have no idea who they are, we had a portion of the conversation where we talked about fan band dynamics and Campbell's feelings on it and how he feels they should go as somebody who loves talking to fans. And I feel that was my favorite part of the interview. And I feel if you guys just you guys being you guys would be very interested in hearing his take on it. Because True. It was
he's
so interesting.
I'm not a rock star. I'm just like you. And I'm no, Campbell, you're a rock star. And he's I'm not a rock star.
He's I want to know about your life. Stop asking me about mine. You heard my song already.
Yeah.
So I feel you guys should definitely at least go listen to that part of the conversation because it's very on brand for all of us.
Truly. So you guys can find that on our podcast feed, Getting Candid with Vacations, the interview. And as well, if you guys haven't heard our Patreon episode, we did something dedicated to our 2024 predictions of what is going to be themes that we're going to be see happening in 2024 within pop culture, general societal trends. Honestly, it was really fun to get to talk about. And some of those trends are going to continue to come up in this episode. And I think maybe, I think our predictions will continue to come up throughout the year as we do our podcast, which I think is really fun to have done it for Patreon.
Yeah. No, it was fun to put on our little trend forecaster hats and think about it, because when we started it, we were this is gonna be silly goofy, and then we actually went into smart Sarah and Jenna mode and had a really meaningful conversation.
Yes.
And I think it was really interesting. So if you want to hear that, plus all of our other back catalog of Patreon episodes, you can get that over at patreon.com/name3songs. You can pay anything from $1 to $10 a month for access to those, as well as our Discord server. And honestly, if you just want to hear the episode, you can go join and then cancel. We won't hate you. I wouldn't blame you. It's a good time episode. I do it myself.
Once again, that's over at patreon.com/name3songs. And today, we do have our Fangirl Nonsense, as always, but we also are talking about the death of Pitchfork and what this means for music media, music journalism, why a publication like Pitchfork was really important, the cultural relevance it has, the historic impact that it leaves, and what we think is going to be happening in the wake of Pitchfork folding with the rise of platforms like TikTok. It's a really in-depth discussion. It's really quite interesting, as well as we're talking about Margot Robbie, who said that she thinks she might have to step away from the camera for a little while because people are getting tired of her, which we would like to argue is something that only a woman would say. And that thought has never crossed a man's mind in any man's entire life. So we're defending Margot Robbie to the death. If you want to find timestamps for all these things, it'll be on our Instagram stories as well as our highlights. And with all that being said, of course, it's time for our fangirl nonsense. We got some big things this week. We got new Logan Lerman pics, and we have Zayn Malik out in public. Honestly, that was enough. That was enough to feed us. Not to mention that Jacob Elordi was on SNL. And Sarah wrote on the notes Jacob, and I'm like, our Jacob was on SNL.
I'm like, what do we even start? I feel like we should start with Zayn, because the fact that Zayn has been going to so many Paris Fashion Week shows this past week and like showing up in fits, and not only showing up in fits, but showing up in like with One Direction hair.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I can't. I guess like they're pushing him to be back in public life for this new album that's gonna come out. And he seemed fine. I saw the cutest video though, where they're like these people waiting outside, and he just was like, "Oh, did you want a photo?" to everyone.
Yes,
and I'm like,
I know.
Oh my God.
It was so wholesome.
On our Discord server through Patreon, Elena was like, guys, he's so emo. I love him. About an Instagram story that Zayn shared where a fan had given him a letter, and Zayn wrote, "Just want to make something clear. It doesn't matter how many times I read letters like this from you. They make me cry. I love you and thank you deeply for all your support and love."
Oh, baby Zayn.
Reading that just like brings me back to in the Call Her Daddy interview when Zayn was like, "I was so worried about my pet chicken." or whatever exotic bird he had on his lap in the car. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this whole time you're trying to sell us as a Bradford bad boy when you're really...
I know, you're a sweetie.
A Bradford soft boy.
Yes, I agree.
I think having a daughter changed him.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe having some time away from the limelight changed him.
Yeah, being on the farm, having a kid. Now he's softened up.
He touched grass. He's not jaded at all. Okay, well, we are excited for more of what Zayn is going to be doing. I did also see that like a car kind of ran over his foot, and then he posted and he was like, "Don't worry, I'm okay. Like these bad boys protected me," and then uploaded a photo of his shoes.
I saw a quote tweet of that, and somebody was like, "No, you're okay because thousands of Muslim women are praying for your safety every single day." And I was like, that's probably also true.
Yeah. We do have new Logan Lerman pics dropped thanks to his very, very, very generous girlfriend who was basically saying...
fiance now. Her name is Anna Luisa Corrigan, and they're engaged as of November 21st.
That's so sweet.
And she is the gift that keeps on giving, because she shares him with us.
Yeah. She's like, you know what the world needs? Like a carousel of Logan Lerman pics.
I also love that Logan Lerman is a professional vacationer like Dua Lipa. But yeah, this has truly been a week for the crushes of the ages, because also Jacob Elordi, who is everybody's crush, being on SNL. It felt like the SNL writers showed up to the writing room and were just like, so every sketch is going to be about the fact that he's tall and hot. And they're like, we have nothing else to go off of. That's literally what it was.
Yeah.
It was so funny. I do think personally, my two favorite things were the sketch where he was a professional lip reader, and then they're like, here's our little lesbian intern, Renee Rapp.
Yes.
And she was like, yes, I'm on court-appointed media training. Because I've just been saying shit.
Accurate and real. Funny.
It was so good. It was so good. And then my other favorite Jacob Elordi moment was in the one with the AA meeting, and he was like, those women would sit on my face like a gas mask.
Oh, that was wild. That sketch was wild.
It was wild. I was like, oh my God, I can't. But I honestly think that maybe Renee Rapp outshined him in her Mean Girls, in like the song that she does with Megan Thee Stallion, where she did like full choreo, was so trusting of a bra for somebody, so trusting of a bathing suit top for somebody who has as good a tits as Renee Rapp has. And then Megan Thee Stallion came out.
I know. Megan looks so good. I think she won
the whole show. They all look so good.
Yeah. And then having Rachel McAdams there as well.
I know.
And then did you see the tweet or whatever? Did you see the photo where they're all doing the Spider-Man
like
pointing at each other?
Yeah.
Chef's kiss.
And I guess also it's similarly in Fangirl Nonsense, Megan Thee Stallion did post that there was a photo of her and Cara Delevingne and Renee Rapp on like they're both on each side of her, and she was like, my two pointless lesbian bodyguards.
Is that what she said?
Yeah. it's like almost, I think that's like verbatim. Let me check.
Oh my God, that's so funny. To clarify, Renee Rapp posted on her Instagram story sharing the photo that Megan posted of basically Renee and Cara looking like her bodyguards. And Renee said, lesbian bodyguards, they can't do anything, but they'll talk shit, which is funny. But it would be significantly funnier if Megan Thee Stallion had posted it.
Yeah. I mean, now that I'm looking at it again, it does feel like something Renee Rapp would say, but I feel like it also feels like something Megan Thee Stallion would say.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, lots of fangirl nonsense. I think it's like the best type of fangirl nonsense because it's truly just stuff to giggle about.
Absolutely.
Because we need something to giggle about because this has been a week. This has been a week. It's been a little bit exhausting, I think, for anybody who cares
Pluto's
about...
moving into the age of Aquarius. We had a full moon in Capricorn. It's been a week.
Astrologically speaking, if you care about music journalism speaking, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the world of journalism, Pitchfork has been folded into GQ, and there were mass layoffs at Pitchfork this past week. I mean, I don't know statistics, but it honestly, based off of everybody on my timeline announcing they were laid off, it felt like at least 50% of staff was laid off. I don't think that that's factual, but that's what it felt like based off of how much my Twitter timeline was talking about like these layoffs and what was happening. I'm just going to read the announcement and we're going to go from there. So this was like a note that Condé Nast, who has owned Pitchfork since 2015, sent out to everybody.
Well, also it's from Anna Wintour.
Yeah, and so therefore it was from Anna Wintour because she is in charge. And the last time I checked, I doubt Anna Wintour knows a goddamn thing about music or music criticism based off of the fact that everybody that I am aware of that works at Vogue is like a trust fund person who does journalism for funsies. Just an opinion, maybe a fact, just an opinion. Anyway, Anna Wintour writes, Dear all, today we are evolving our Pitchfork team structure by bringing the team into the GQ organization. This decision was made after a careful evaluation of Pitchfork's performance and what we believe is the best path forward for the brand so that our coverage of music can continue to thrive within the company. Both Pitchfork and GQ have unique and valuable ways that they approach music journalism, and we are excited for the new possibilities together. With these organizational changes, some of our Pitchfork colleagues will be leaving the company today. I want to thank Pooja for her leadership of the title over the last 5 years. She has been a wonderful colleague and advocate for the brand, and I'm grateful for her and the team's many contributions. And then it goes on to like do layoff speak. 2 statements before we start, before we get deeper into this, is that saying that they're valuable ways that they approach music journalism. I don't know how many of you guys are aware of like the artist called The Dare, but Pitchfork was like, this is trash, boo. And GQ was like, this man is so cool and interesting. We love him.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And so I think that says a lot about their approaches to music journalism. And I don't think that says a good thing about their approaches to music journalism. In my, once again, personal opinion about music and music journalism.
Wait, time out. What is your opinion on The Dare?
I think that he probably has a trust fund. And I don't think he's doing anything interesting. And he looks like he
his music.
Maybe
I
would
just
need
think
a
it's
team.
slutty rock music.
I'm not The Dare hater, but I do think that somebody who works at GQ would be like, it's so cool and hip of me to like The Dare.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody at Pitchfork is gonna be like,
No, he's fucking trust fund. Yeah. No.
He gives trust fund vibes. I don't know if he has a trust fund, but those are the vibes that he gives me and clearly people at Pitchfork based off of his music. And I don't know. If you need context for who The Dare is, I will link both the Pitchfork review of his album and this profile in our show notes because
we don't have time to get into
I don't have time to explain The Dare to you guys because we have bigger things to talk about. It felt like a very poignant message, but also for the past 3 months, all I paid attention to is men making rock music in New York City. So it's very relevant to me.
Okay, what was your next statement to get off your chest?
My next statement to get off my chest is that in 2015, when Pitchfork was purchased by Condé Nast, the point of their purchase was because, quote, they wanted access to the very passionate audience of millennial males.
Oh.
And I think folding Pitchfork into GQ is once again the misunderstanding of who is a music fan. Because if you pay attention to our podcast or anything I've ever said, music is for the girls.
You're like, music should just be made by men for women.
Music should be made by any gender, only for girls. Like if you feel in your soul that you understand what I mean when I say that, you are a girl and you deserve music. But like that's how gender works right now. Like you understand.
Sorry
that,
to make the rules.
You understand that when I say music is for the girls, that is not a gendered statement. It is a statement about emotion and feeling.
Okay, so I will say that I didn't know GQ even covered music. Period. Other than the time that we did that, like
the fucking One Direction cover.
Well, yes, but the When Tomorrow By Together was on GQ Hype, and we compared it to like Hannah Ewan's like Lana Del Rey feature story for Rolling Stone. But yeah, I did not know GQ covered music. And this is the thing that we talked about when we talked about GQ Hype, was we were like, who is the target audience of GQ? And I think like there are people who are not just like 40-year-old men who are interested in GQ. Like that's what GQ thinks their target audience is. And I do think they have other readers. But like to me, Pitchfork is like the antithesis of what GQ is. Like GQ is like luxury, and Pitchfork is literally founded out of like some dude's basement because he was a fucking weirdo and wanted to write music reviews. Like,
I mean, I saw a lot of journalism Twitter being like, the New Yorker is right there. If you were going to fold it into something, why wouldn't you fold it into the New Yorker, where there's already culture critics that are part of staff there, when like GQ doesn't do culture criticism? I mean, obviously it's not the whole point, but literally the largest chunk of people that got laid off are like features writers from Pitchfork. So like the people who are writing the stuff that I would read from Pitchfork, because I'm not a huge fan of like music reviews and criticism. Like that's just like not what I enjoy reading. But like the stuff I would read from Pitchfork, all those people are gone. And I'm like, I don't want to read a GQ writer's Pitchfork feature.
The interesting thing is like for people who don't necessarily pay that close of attention to like Pitchfork, they're just like notorious for their reputation of like giving kind of bad reviews. And I think like, as Sarah mentioned, like when Condé Nast took over and then when they announced Pooja Patel as editor-in-chief in 2018, I think a lot of people saw that as like a
death to the brand. Like that's literally like a lot of readers saw it as a death to the brand, because they were like, oh, this woman's going to come in and she's going to ruin everything. And instead she made it better because she brought in people from different backgrounds with different voices and thoughts and feelings. And like, I personally think she fixed a lot of Pitchfork.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I didn't. Yeah. So, I mean, my opinion would be that she arguably made it a lot better, but obviously old school Pitchfork readers were a little mad about it. But I think with Pooja Patel coming in as editor-in-chief, it kind of turned the reputation of Pitchfork around a lot into, like Sarah said, just being a place that was like more inclusive and covering a lot more diverse types of art from a lot more diverse perspectives, which is like very important, and not just having the same type of perspective constantly reviewing music. But until that point, Pitchfork like had, and it has like a very distinct image of just giving bad reviews. And maybe this is again kind of just like the meme version of like what people thought about it, but it was like just giving bad reviews to literally anything, to a point where like even really big artists, we talked about this like relatively recently, because I think what spurred this on was Laura Snapes had written a review of Charlie XCX's Vroom Vroom EP back when it came out and gave it a bad review. And then Laura Snapes recently revisited it and said, oh, like, I didn't get it. Like, I shouldn't have done that. Like, I messed up. And it spurred on this discussion. But we were talking even about how like Taylor Swift's 1989 was not even reviewed, and then they reviewed like the Ryan Adams version of 1989. So we brought this up recently, where it's like Pitchfork like wouldn't even cover certain types of music because that's not like, part of it was like, oh, that's not what we're intended to cover, like mainstream pop music, but also it was like a little bit of like, is this just some snobbery? So I think like they definitely had a very distinct image in a lot of people's minds of just like having edgy takes to have edgy takes. But the point that I made when we talked about Charlie, and the point that I want to make again, is that stuff like music criticism and reviews, as well as feature writing, helps us establish a point in time when
Yeah.
we're looking back at music history. And without things like album reviews, we wouldn't be able to go back and understand how people were perceiving it back then. So, like, for
Yeah.
example, with Charlie's Room for EP, it was essentially ahead of its time because now
Yeah.
that sound is really popular, and that's what Laura Snape said. But at the time, it wasn't mainstream popular. That sound was not mainstream popular. It was like,
Mhm.
this is fucking weird. What is she doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, without that review, we wouldn't have that chronological like imprint in history of what was going on.
Yeah. And so the loss of Pitchfork in the way that we know it, it feels very somber and it feels like, well, what's the future of culture journalism? What's the future of music journalism? But like when you look back on the history of journalism and especially music journalism has always been on the chopping block. Like if you think about like VH1 and MTV and like TRL, like you had like on air music personalities like doing a form of music journalism. If you think about like 2008, like 2010, like the multiple times where it's like, oh, like we're gonna pivot to video, we're gonna pivot back to writing, we're gonna pivot to video.
Yeah.
Like how many times that there have been like mass layoffs and like move shifts within specifically like culture and music journalism that has just thrown people on the streets because people care more about a bottom dollar than the quality of the work that's being put out. And so it's like, okay, like how are we going to make more money? And I think that that's kind of like the antithesis of what culture journalism really is. I think I maybe come from this from like a warped perspective as somebody who like has always been kind of like a hobbyist journalist or just somebody who's either just like made a minimal amount of money or no money for most of the journalism work that I've done, and also grew up reading blogs by like quote unquote girls who were like the tastemakers of music. We like did a whole episode about this. Like the way I grew up and like the music journalism that I really enjoyed was a lot of people who were doing it just based off of the passion of journalism and like wanting to share their interests and their passions with everybody. And I feel like the bigger picture of like culture journalism and music journalism, especially when it's good, is like people are sharing things that they're passionate about or excited about,
Yeah.
or even on the other side, things that they're not excited about. And because people trust them and they read their thing and it's like, oh, like so and so didn't like this album, I don't know if I'm interested in that album
I mean,
anymore.
yeah, and to that point, Pitchfork was known for making and breaking a lot of artists because
Yeah.
of their reviews, because their opinions were so well trusted and curated.
But also on top of that, it's like there are even artists who were tweeting who were like, Pitchfork gave me a chance and they didn't like my album, but people who never would have heard about it found my album. And because they're like,
Yeah.
oh, this writer's always kind of a dick, they listened to my album and now I have fans. And so like
Yeah.
in those ways, it's like any press is good press when when
Yeah.
Pitchfork's paying attention to you in a lot of ways. And like, I don't know, it's been a really interesting time watching all of these people saying like, oh, the death of Pitchfork is just like the like death toll for music and culture journalism has been like really, really frustrating to me because I think that culture journalism is a gift. And I think that it's incredible that it's become something that is a sustainable to an extent job for a lot of people. But I think also, like, while I think that culture journalism is important and necessary, I think that there are so many incredibly talented people and publications that are not legacy publications that get like turned a blind eye on. And there's not a lot of space for like quote unquote middle class artists. And I'm talking in regards to journalists and musicians and even like actors and actresses in a lot of senses, where like these people who are writing for publications that are really good and get access to like relatively big names, but like just aren't treated the same because they don't write for like Rolling Stone or Billboard or like those big names. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think like more than one thing can be true at once,
yeah,
right? Like we can mourn the death of Pitchfork as a cultural institution and also say look at all these other journalists who are still
yeah,
doing the same quality of work who maybe
yeah,
don't always get the same recognition. I think like something like this is like Sarah said, like music journalism has always been one of the first things on the chopping block.
yeah,
And I think in general, across society, across various different industries, we're seeing a lot of turnover right now when it comes to the intersection of like culture and technology and institution and capitalism,
yeah,
of what's going to make it into the next era and what's not. And
yeah,
I think platforms, just for example, platforms like TikTok are shaking things up a lot where people now can get information and music reviews and opinions from citizens on the apps of TikTok and don't necessarily have to read a magazine. And that also is a much deeper conversation about media literacy that I'm not going to get
Yeah.
into right now. But I just think that this is an example of this culmination of, like I said, capitalism, technology, and culture, and what's going to make it and what's not going to make it.
Yeah.
And clearly, in this scenario, the bottom line was what was prioritized about making money, and that's always what music journalism has been in
Yeah.
danger of, is there not being enough money for it. But I think there's a larger conversation to be had about, like, out with the old, in with the new, of what is going to rise in the place of something like Pitchfork. And I
Yeah.
think it's important to note also, because we have a publication like Rolling Stone that, like, is one of the most highly regarded music publications that's out there, but Rolling Stone is not covering the artists that Pitchfork is covering.
Yeah, and they're
And Rolling Stone
struggling to
is
keep with the times.
and Rolling Stone is not going to cover artists that Pitchfork covered. And
Yeah.
that's this is a key differentiator, is like Rolling Stone very much cares about covering artists who are like already quite famous.
Yeah.
And like Rolling Stone does great journalism, and that's not the problem. The problem is that where is the space for the artists who are up and comers? And
Yeah.
it feels like there's this very big gap between like musicians who are literally just starting out. There's a category of like blogs and people who are talking about artists and who are working with artists who are very, very small. But what
Yeah.
about this middle ground of people who
Yeah.
haven't yet made it to a Boy Genius? Like, I would say like Boy Genius could be a good example of something who's like very much an indie artist, or like Phoebe Bridgers even.
Yeah. But
Like came from very like out of the blue, like indie music, and is somebody who would have benefited from a publication like Pitchfork. I don't quote me on like historics here. Like, I'm just using her as an example.
Yeah.
In order to then launch her career to the next level, where Boy Genius is now allowed to be a lot bigger than they ever would have been if there wasn't a publication of Pitchfork's size being able to like put them in front of a bigger audience.
Yeah. No, and this is what I'm saying about like how we're in this weird space for like quote unquote middle class artists when it comes to like mid-range publications and mid-range artists. I wonder how, like, now with like Pitchfork going away, if other legacy publications, like these big publications, like if they're going to shift to accommodate for this loss of space for these artists, or if this is going to give opportunities for publications like Paste and 1883 and Stereo Gum to like maybe move up the ranks when it comes to publications. Because I feel like there are a handful of these like quote unquote middle class like publications covering artists of all sizes, where you can find out about artists that you would never have found out about in similar vein to Pitchfork. And so I wonder, because I feel like a lot of these bigger name publications, especially Rolling Stone, it's like we're always seeing the same fucking people on the cover of the magazine. And again, it's not that the journalism is bad. The journalism is incredible. It's just that the people holding the reins are stuck in their ways. And I feel like these mid-sized publications have younger people at the helm of them who are focused on sharing the things that they are passionate about and wanting to share, similarly to what the people at Pitchfork were doing. Yeah. And so it's going to be really interesting seeing again how things shift, because I also think Jenna has a point where like this could make more room for reputable people on TikTok and YouTube to like take off and be treated with the respect that they deserve for the work that they're putting in. And also people who like do podcast platform stuff as well. Because I think, again, like these are like avenues of journalism that are relatively new that people question because it's different to what they're used to. Because there are so many people from like the old days of journalism and PR and record labels that are still working and doing their things where they're like expecting like, oh, I want a cover story. If we don't have a cover story, I'm not going to do this. And it's like, how is it not the same thing? Like getting like a big story on a really important website, or getting like a 2-hour interview on a popular podcast. Like, why does that not hold the same weight in a lot of senses? And so I think it's just going to be really interesting to see if these people holding the reins are going to be willing to adjust to the ever-changing journalism and media environment that has been happening as the like younger millennials and Gen Zs have been adjusting to technology and the ever-changingness of media and media consumption and media coverage, while these like people who have been around the block a couple of times are unwilling to like change their ways and just being like, oh, it has to be like one of the big 5 publications or else I don't care.
I think this is interesting because we're talking about the shifting media landscape. Yeah. And in thinking of Pitchfork being started in 1996, the very, 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 I mean, even pre-blog era, really. Like, I would
Yeah.
argue blog era started taking off in the 2000s. So, like,
Yeah.
even doing this before it was popular. Like, looking at it in the context of, again, technology and culture and evolution here. A publication like Pitchfork had its life cycle
Mhm.
of coming from nothing, being so grassroots, to
Mhm.
becoming everything, to
Yeah.
then being slapped in the face with the reality of becoming more diverse, and then getting through that and being able to get through that and being able to do really great journalism on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
I think it's sad all around to see something like that end, period. Like, no
Yes.
matter what, everyone's sad about it ending. However, I do also think that it's interesting, like, these publications, not all publications, are having
Mhm.
a very hard time adapting to changing mediums like video and podcasts and YouTube and TikTok. And there's like very few publications that like are doing video content very well. And I think Vox is like honestly one of the publications that's like gotten video down really well with doing their like explained series. But there's so many publications that just straight up don't know how to do video, or they don't have budget for it, or they're asking journalists to learn how to do video when it's like
Yeah.
that's not necessarily their area of expertise. And so
Yeah.
my thing is like with something like the fall of Pitchfork, looking at it more from the cultural technology revolution perspective, like what is going to rise from this? And I
Yeah.
think it's not going to be a media publication that's trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. It's going to be something completely different that didn't have a background in blogging, that didn't come from this
Yeah.
era, that is now building up something new on TikTok. And I mean, like, even YouTubers like Anthony Fontano, and I think there's another guy, but I can never remember his name. They started from nothing, right?
Yeah, and they just
And
do it because
like,
they're
there's,
passionate about it, similarly to the guy that started Pitchfork, and that's,
yeah.
like,
And
the whole
I'm
thing. It's the whole
exactly. So it's like,
thing.
to me, there's going to be something that's completely different. That's not either of these things that's going to rise out of specifically TikTok.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like my whole point of saying like culture journalism and music journalism is a gift that we've been given, and like the fact that that's something that can be a full-time job for more than like 10 people is incredible, because like again, Pitchfork started off of passion and a guy with a computer in a basement somewhere, you know, and like Anthony Fantano started with a passion and access to YouTube, and like every person that's like started something from nothing, like who's not like a trust fund baby, like the Wenners who started Rolling Stone, like these are people creating opportunities for themselves based off of like wanting to share their love and passion
Yeah.
for something. And I
Yeah.
feel like something like Pitchfork can happen again in its own way, in the way of the landscape now, because the way of the landscape then, it made sense for what Pitchfork was. And so I think like I want to look at this from like a glass half full perspective rather than the like pessimistic, this is the death of journalism. And it's like, I don't think it is. I think it's like a birth of something new. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's something that like could be exciting if you're willing to change and adjust with the times.
Yeah. I mean, we read like a few obituaries. We read a few like op-eds about Pitchfork folding. And essentially what was repeated a lot is that it, for the people who were working there at Pitchfork, they said the last few years felt like a dream. And
Yeah.
it felt like any story could be their last story. And so it's like knowing that, it's like that's scary to think about. Like
Yeah.
they were not only monetarily were they hanging on by a thread, but also knowing this could fold at any moment. I don't think whatever Pitchfork becomes under GQ is going to do well. Like
No.
if you get rid of the thing that was like doing well and then you like strip it and then you're like, no, but we saved 3 writers. Like that's not,
Yeah, it's not the
we
same
saved 3
thing.
writers, but we're putting it under this other thing that nobody wants.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
okay.
yeah, because I think like there is like a preconceived notion of what GQ means. And I feel like even if there are writers who remain from Pitchfork doing the critiques for the Pitchfork vertical under GQ, there's still going to be like, you're going to be clicking on that to read the Pitchfork review and being like, what are the rules that GQ has given them compared to like what
Right.
was it at Pitchfork prior? But I mean, I don't know. And speaking of like this thing about doing something for a passion and these op-ed slash obituaries we were reading, there was one in Rolling Stone by Mark Hogan that genuinely made me cry. It was like a very long one. He worked at Pitchfork for like over 15 years. Like all he wanted to do was like be a music journalist. And for most of the time that he was working at Pitchfork, he was paid like half cents on the dollar to do something where he had like a quote unquote real job during the day. And the second he would get off work, he'd be like on the subway listening to music and caring about it and writing about it just because
Yeah.
he loved Pitchfork and loved music and wanted to like share his love for music with everybody. And it was just very moving. So if you're going to read any of these in the show notes, I would say read that one, but it might make you emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. There was again another op-ed in Defector that was also really good. And I kind of liked the closing line that this journalist Israel Daramola had to close out this article, which was, if there's a better future for music journalism to come, it will perhaps spring from the reemergence of small batch music blogs and more localized coverage. But what we're left with now is a corporatized wasteland and fewer publications than ever equipped to write about music with all the rigor and passion it deserves. And I feel like that's honestly a pretty good summary of kind of everything we've expressed so far.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, that's the issue when we talk about TikTok on this podcast and the pop culture commentators on there and then the media publications writing about them and like vice versa and all of that, is the lack of journalistic education or experience and like integrity and media literacy that comes from these people who are just like reading off blind items or reading off headlines from People or Page Six or wherever and then just giving their thoughts. But I think based off of what I've seen from people talking about music on TikTok, it's from a similar vein of like where Jenna and I come from and where these people who started Pitchfork came from, of just like being really passionate about music and wanting to talk about it. And there are people on there who are just like reviewing songs and talking about music and being loud about it. And maybe just like aren't strong enough of a writer to be a music journalist, but are really good at talking about it. So I think like for me, I feel like there can be, and there's a lot of people who are passionate enough to turn this around in just like a new order kind of way. And so, I mean, I wanted to leave the Pitchfork conversation on kind of like a high note because I do understand that like this is a very unsettling time for journalism. And like, speaking of like unsettling times and people feeling like, oh, maybe like the rug's gonna get ripped out from under me any second now. There was this really interesting interview that Margot Robbie did with Deadline about like what her plans are following the success of like the Barbie movie. And she was just kind of like, I'm everywhere. I think I'm going to need to take a break. And this was like really interesting to Jenna and I, and we wanted to talk about it with you guys because there's been like a history of specifically female actors like being really beloved and then all of a sudden everybody turning on them for like one reason or another. This happened with like Anne Hathaway, where like there was a rumor about her not being great to work with, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, Anne Hathaway's a bitch, we want nothing to do with her. I mean, Jennifer Lawrence took
I was gonna say, I feel like this happened to Jennifer Lawrence and maybe even like Emma Stone.
Yeah. Well, like I don't know to what extent it happened to Emma Stone, but it feels like it happened to Emma Stone because she stopped acting for a little bit. But the Jennifer Lawrence thing was really like in our faces because she went from being like America's sweetheart and being in so many movies and so many different types of movies and like winning tons of awards and like being really celebrated for like how serious of an actor she was while still being like such a real person and like down like whatever, like loving food and all of these things and interviews. And then all of a sudden everybody was like, she's so fake. She's such a pick me. All she talks about is pizza. And everybody like fucking hated her. And then she had to like take time off acting to deal with that. And so this is like something that we see time and time again. And it felt kind of reminiscent of some of the topics that we've touched on in our old deep dive episodes of the podcast. So we felt like it was something we should talk a little bit about today.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, we were trying to like rack our brains if this is like something that like a male actor has ever dealt with, experienced, said. And we like can't really think of anything. I'm like, everyone at some point chooses to take time away from the limelight and like they'll just like not do movies for a little while and then come back. But like for her to acknowledge that to camera when like, has she like been in anything recently other than Barbie?
I mean, she has like the Ocean's 11 prequel that's going to be coming out at some point or like is in development. They haven't even started filming it. I guess like all of the like Suicide Squad stuff. But I mean, like Deadline basically was like, oh, is it time for a break? And she was like, everyone says that. Everyone's like, are you having a break? And I'm like, you know, I'm a producer, right? We don't really get a break. And then they're like, that's why people ask out of concern. And then Margot goes, true. No, the producing is 24/7. But on the acting side, this is as long as I haven't acted on a set. yet because we finished Barbie in October of 2022. So it's already been more than a year since I was on set as an actor, and other than COVID, that's the first time that's ever happened. I also think everyone's probably sick of the sight of me for now. I should probably disappear from screens for a while. Honestly, if I did another movie too soon, people would say, her again? We did a whole summer with her. We're over it. I don't know what I'll do next, but I hope it's a little while away. And the fact that she's
See,
thinking about this,
yeah,
crazy.
because her filmography, like she's done stuff. She did Suicide Squad, but that wasn't like anything, like she wasn't being shoved down our throats. Like Peter Rabbit 2, that was this is an animated movie. She did voice narration. She did Babylon, which I saw this movie on like Amazon or something, and this other movie called Amsterdam, but those were more like niche releases.
Yeah.
Like it's just wild to me because I'm like, as compared to like someone like a dude who's just like constantly doing Marvel movies all the time, or like
Yeah.
even Timothy Chalamet, like I feel like he's been like fucking everywhere,
Yeah.
and no one's annoyed about it. Like it's like what my point that I'm trying to make is that Margot Robbie basically did one massive movie and now she's like, oh, I must hide.
Yeah.
And it's like the fact that a movie like Barbie can do so well and she feels like everyone is sick of me, like that feels sad.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about this on our Patreon episode when we did our predictions for 2024. And I was saying like, what is going to happen like post Barbie summer?
Yeah.
And I have this feeling that, I mean, from what we've like, literally from what we've learned in doing this podcast and like reflecting back on things is there's always this pendulum swing of like a really, really great moment with something like Barbie, like for women and for feminism. And then 2024 is going to have some type of like wild backlash that we're like not even expecting. And it feels like this with Margot Robbie too, of like, other than Barbie, she hasn't been like that busy in the movies compared to other actors.
It's something that women think about and a man never would.
Right.
Because
I agree.
like I just think about how the internet treats Chris Pratt and how everybody was like, why the fuck is he doing the voice of Mario? Like, why is he everywhere? All of this stuff. Has Chris Pratt ever acknowledged it or thought about it a day in his life? No, he just keeps fucking taking jobs. And it's like, he's not thinking about it at all. And so I just think it's really interesting because she's done one movie that had so much success and she did like a really fucking cool press run for it. And now she's like, oh no, I need to be concerned. And I honestly think the reason why she's thinking like this is because what's happened to other actresses in the past of just like people all of a sudden, like them going from America's sweetheart to everybody turning on them. And it's like people have literally turned on Chris Pratt because he basically was like, oh, my first wife and my defected son. Now I have a perfect wife and a perfect daughter, and who cares about my first family? Like, he deserves flack. It's just like, it's so crazy that she thinks about this and that like women have to think about this. I know it's what your point is.
Exactly. That's what I mean comparatively. He's done so many big movies. Like, okay, he's done all so the like Guardians of the Galaxy. Multiple Jurassic Park movies, Avengers movies, Lego movies,
like two different types of franchises. Because he was in the Marvel franchise universe and in the Jurassic World universe. And so it's like he's doing all of this stuff and never once is he thinking about it. He's like, how many men's health covers can I get? And I just think it's really interesting because like also on top of that, it's like when you think about this like idea of celebrity and people being perceived and like the public image of a person and like how these people are public figures and we're consuming them as an audience, like what does this mean for them? Because I feel like also we wouldn't turn this into a feminism thing if she was like, oh, I'm tired, but she's not saying I'm tired. She's saying, oh, the people are going to be tired of me. And so then it feels like, oh, this is a misogyny versus feminism thing.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
It's just interesting because then like a week, like not even like 4 days later, there was this Sunday Times interview with Paul Mescal, which is behind a paywall, so I couldn't read the whole thing, but there was this quote from it that really stuck out to me. Basically, the only information we have from this article is a tweet from Popbase. I am so sorry. I didn't want to spend £6 to read the whole article, but basically what the tweet says is Paul Mescal says he would be depressed if his role in Gladiator 2 makes him more famous. And then the quote goes, is it just that more people will stop you in the street? I get profoundly depressed if that's so and hope it isn't true. I'll have an answer next year, but if Gladiator 2 impacts my life in that way, I'll be in a bad spot. I'd have to move on and do an obtuse play nobody wants to see. And so I just think like it's interesting because I feel like men are allowed to think about this and women aren't. Women have to worry about if people are going to get sick of them and men get to worry about if they're going to get sick of people bothering them. I've never seen a woman like, and this is no hate to Paul Mescal because like I completely understand this. I understand because also most of the movies he's done prior to this and most of the stuff he's done has been like a little bit niche. Whereas like Gladiator is like something that most people are just gonna go see, you know?
Right.
And so like the idea of like that kind of fame being like something that is probably in your future must feel so jarring and like terrifying to think about, going from like maybe one in every 30 people recognizing you to one in every five, you know?
Right.
And like that just completely changes your life because like while we're making like we were making fun of him with the whole rumor about him running away from girls he slept with and like the paparazzi photos and like yeah, he gets paparazzi photos taken of him, but you see these photos of him running places, like these paparazzi photos of him running places, and like are people stopping him? No. And like he's not gonna be able to go do his runs. How's he gonna run away from the girls if
I
Gladys?
mean, Harry Styles did his little runny runs on tour.
Yeah, but also we saw videos on TikTok of fans telling Harry, "Don't go that way," because fans are gonna mob you if you go that way.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, it is interesting because like my brain is just going to Daniel Radcliffe after Harry Potter. He did like a lot of
Weird movies.
Broadway stuff.
And Broadway.
Yeah. And well, even Robert Pattinson, like after Twilight, he just started doing weird movies.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe he signed on to Twilight because he thought it was a weird movie and then it became something else completely. But like, I guess in a way, those two people probably were very deliberate decisions because they were maybe like, I'm getting too famous and I maybe like don't want to be this type of famous.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the day, they still care about acting and they still enjoy acting.
Yeah.
And they don't want to not do it, but they just don't want to be as, and like arguably Robert Pattinson is still very famous, but not as famous as Timothée Chalamet is right now.
No, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because again, it's like, I quite like Daniel Radcliffe as an actor. I think he's made a lot of really interesting decisions in the films and TV shows that he's been in, as well as the Broadway shows that he's been in. But like when I think back on his career, like I don't think that there was ever like a huge time where you could go where like, I feel like he didn't take a lot of time off, you know, but he went and just started doing things that like were not going to be seen by as many people and were going to be seen by specific types of people. And so again, I feel like it's these women are so worried. It's not even so much that the women are worried, but it's more so like me acting has become so detrimental to me that like I can't even go and do something more niche. I have to just step away and be not perceived. Like that's what it feels like. It feels like annoying doing this because I'm like, oh, I'm making it a feminist issue and I don't even know if it is one, but it feels like one because like if you just look at like a lot of men's acting history who have done franchise films and then decided to pivot away, it's not even like they take that much time off. It's like they just pivot away. And then like Ryan Gosling, I think is a good example of that because he did like The Notebook and then did like a bunch of fucking weird movies. And now it was like in Barbie. And so it's like he just picks and chooses projects and he's not taking time off because people are sick of him. He's just doing things because he loves acting and doesn't want to stop. And it's like Margot clearly loves acting and being involved in this because she's doing producing work and like all of that kind of stuff. And yet she's out here being like, oh yeah, I need to take some time away from being seen on the silver screen because people are going to be tired of my face. And it's like, have you seen your face? Who's ever going to get tired of that? But like, other than like the cheekiness of it, it's like, she should have the option in the same way that a lot of these men before her have had to take an art house film, to do something a little bit silly or a little bit different instead of like genuinely sitting and thinking and worrying about, are people going to start hating me and like attacking me and coming for me?
Right. Yeah. I mean, these two are like kind of very different scenarios, so not 100% a fair comparison. But to me, they're different in the way that like Margot Robbie is not afraid of the fame.
Yeah.
She's more so afraid of backlash from being famous. Yeah. Whereas like Paul Mescal is like literally afraid of being that famous.
Yeah.
Not like just in general, people knowing him that much. And so it's like he can make a choice to not participate in that if he doesn't want to in the way that like Daniel Radcliffe has. But Margot Robbie, if she wants to be doing this, she feel like she can't necessarily be doing it. And I mean, I would argue that it is a feminist issue. Like, even if we don't have statistical proof, because like the fact that women generally feel this way, like I just think like for all the progress that we've made in general, like in our corner of the internet,
Yeah.
Our corner of the internet is nothing like general America. And you know who the primary audience for Barbie was? General America.
Yeah.
And so this is what I meant about the pendulum swing, is that I think there's going to be a backlash that we can't even predict because it's not coming from our corner of the internet. And I understand, like, I get why she said this. And I would argue that it is a feminist issue because it's anti-feminism that's going to be coming for her.
I mean, thank you for validating me. I appreciate it. Well, because like, I don't know, just sometimes I feel like, oh, am I just like being angry to be angry? But I don't think I'm angry. I just think like when you notice a pattern, you know, a pattern might be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot today, a lot of thoughts and feelings, a lot of opinions being shared. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and feelings and opinions on all of these things too. So you can come chat with us on social media about all things Pitchfork, all things Margot Robbie, all things, you know, feminist issues when it comes to being a movie star in the world that we are in today. We are at Name 3 Songs on all platforms. And if you have any grievances, beef, or love you would like to give either myself or Jenna, you can find us on social media as well. I am at Sarah_Fagan and Jenna is at Jenna_Million. So with all that being said, thanks for joining us this week on Name 3 Songs. And until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Zayn Malik.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.